It's hard to talk about my mom without first mentioning her deep belief in God and her faith, and just so obvious in her life. And she left this family with not one but two pretty much worn out Bibles. The first one given to her on her birthday in 1949 by her parents, and the other one given to her on Christmas in 1973 by my brother and I. And in these Bibles is just interesting verses that are highlighted and underlined of things that she went through sometime in life, and turned to her Bible and found an answer there that helped her. And you know, it wasn't long after she passed there, I was with her and I was able to go through one of these Bibles, and one of those verses jumped out at me. It was Corinthians 14:40, that says that everything should be done well and in order. And I think back of all the things that she did in her life and how that must have been in her mind, because that's how she lived her life. Many of the other verses that Mom has highlighted in her Bible, underlined and highlighted, deal with hanging in there or serving other people. And you know, I remember that so clearly. Friends, family, or strangers, it didn't seem to matter. She just wanted to always put someone before herself. She wasn't just willing to serve other people, she wanted to. And that's exactly what this book tells us to do, and she did a good job of that in her life. Life was well documented thanks to Mom and all the time that she put into making scrapbooks, and everybody in the family and all events all had their own scrapbook, and she put a lot of time into labeling everything and making sure dates were on there and people's names. And that's going to be a big advantage for future generations to look at this stuff, figure out who's who and what's what. I don't know how many of these things that she made. I'll bet if I got them in one spot I could fill a pickup bed with them, but I'm glad to have them. And now it's so much different. We pull out our cell phones and start clicking here and clicking there and sending them to all our buddies, and I think we lose about half of it, and we're going to regret that someday. But it's nice to have these. Mom, you know, didn't really have a concept of the internet or let alone cell phones. And I remember one time we tried to explain to her what a selfie was, and she listened for a while and kind of had a puzzled look on her face, and finally said, "Why in the world would I ever want to take a picture of myself and send it to everybody?" And you know, we didn't have a good response for that. She kind of had a good point. But we'll probably regret not having all that well documented like she has here. And I'm thankful that she spent so much time doing this, because it sure means a lot, and she did a really good job with each and every one of them. Mom came from a good family. That Farner group was, they're good people, every one of them, and I'm thankful that she had such a strong family that carried forward into the family that she had here. And she used to say that when she was a kid, she'd help out by help her mother and her sisters by making pretty good sized meals for the haying crews, and hired help. And you know, it wasn't just a sandwich and a bag of chips, it was the full deal, and homemade pies and the whole 9 yards. And I know, you know, here she had a whole stack of cookbooks, but I don't think she ever really opened any of them. She would throw this and that in a pan, and boy, we didn't want to miss out on whatever was in that pan when it was done. And she also did a lot of canning. Every summer she'd can fruits and vegetables, and boy, that was a highlight. We'd run out to that rock house and grab a jar of this and a jar of that and head for the dinner table. and it seems like we always ran out of green beans. She would put bacon in them green beans, and we'd go through them pretty fast. And also peaches. She did a lot of peaches, and I think my dad would probably eat a whole quart of peaches by himself if Mom wasn't looking.
I'm sitting here at the Friendsview Hess Creek Canyon patio. It's an area where Mom and I used to enjoy coming after work. After I'd come by from work, we'd come here and visit after dinner. And you can see why. It's there's a creek running by and a lot of trees, occasionally a deer, and a lot of flowers. It's a great place to be, and it seems like a fitting place to come and share some reflections. In fact, I've just come from the reception we had to Remember Mom. It was in Garden View, where she lived. A lot of her neighbors and friends came, and I'm just still kind of overflowing with all the things that were shared, especially from her good friends that lived right around her and the caregivers who were with her over these past months. One was just a George Fox student that started here a month ago and is in the nursing program, and she just with tears in her eyes told me how much it meant to be with Mom. We asked Mom's two sisters and her brother if they have any memories they'd like to share. We'll start with Mary. Mary said at some point in their childhood, Frances and I slept together in the same bed. I remember always trying to lightly hang on to her when she was sleeping. Frances would wake up and become irritated with me. One thing Frances didn't know was that as a child, I believe Frances had a lot better chance of getting into heaven than what I did. So, if the rapture came along during the night and I was hanging on to Frances, then I would also be getting into heaven too. I also remember when Frances started dating Frank in high school. Frank would always drive Frances home from church in the evenings. One evening, Joy and I decided to hide in the back seat of Frank's car. It took quite a while before Frank and Frances finally noticed us. Frances was quite irritated with us for crashing on her date with Frank that night. Well, I have many memories of irritating my sister, as I could be quite ornery to Frances. My most important memory is how much I looked up to her, my big sister, and how I kind of wish I could have been more like her. Which is kind of funny, Mary, because Mom wanted to be more like you and Joy. Frances was so good and kind. Growing up, I thought we would always be really close, but as the years went by and life happened, that wasn't always the case. We weren't able to be in touch with each other as much as we had wanted to. I'll always miss my big sister, whom I loved and admired. Her brother Rick shared that I was 6 years old when my big sister, Frances, married Frank Engle. I remember getting into trouble with my other two sisters, and I would run to Frances for help. When I married and had a daughter, Tracy, Frances practiced with her over and over, getting her ready for the talent show at school. She sang, "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window?" And she won a trophy in 3rd grade for that. Frances was always worried about everyone else. That's an understatement. But not herself. I don't ever remember having an argument with her. I couldn't have asked for a better sister. I remember too that she always had lots of energy to go, go, go. When our dad had dementia and our mother was no longer alive, he would wake up at 4 a.m. with panic attacks there in Melba. I would call Frances and she would meet me at his house and we would calm him down and give him some oxygen. Also in later years, I also thought it was funny that Frank and Frances shared the same reading glasses. They only had one pair and would have arguments as to who needed to wear them the most. Joy came up with a list. Frances was a prayer warrior. Frances put other people first, ahead of herself. Frances was a mother hen to me. I don't remember Frances ever getting mad. Mary and I teased her like crazy, like when we were always trying to throw a mouse in the outhouse when she was out there. One of my favorite memories is when Frank and Frances were in high school dating and were sitting in front of the fire on a couch that had its back to the staircase. Mary and I covered ourselves with sheets and came down very quietly while they were smooching, and we surprised them suddenly, popping our heads out and laughing hysterically. Frances screamed, put on quite a show, and then laughed along. I remember Frances sitting in front of the mirror, combing and working with her hair for hours. I thank God for my family, and I love each of them. Frances was a blessing to me, and I'll miss her deeply.
Mom really enjoyed being a grandmother, no doubt about it. That was a highlight for her, and she loved each one of them in a special way. We've got some video now from those grandkids: Tim Engle, Jessica Silver, Jolene Engle, and JC Engle.
Hi, my name is Tim. I am Frances Engle's grandson, and I just wanted to read a piece that I wrote about her. Billy Graham says, "The greatest legacy one can pass on to one's children and grandchildren is not money or other material things accumulated in one's life, but rather a legacy of character and faith. This, I can testify, is the true and lasting legacy that Frances Engle has handed down to her sons and to her grandchildren. When I look back on my years with Grandma Engle, I have many fond memories. Family dinners, adventures on the ranch, meaningful conversations. And yet, as I really stop and think about what she means to me, I can't help but keep on coming back to this legacy of character and faith that Billy Graham identifies. I can't help but dwell on the moments when the end is near for a close family member, and the legacy that is passed on. The eye contact, the body language, the deep well of appreciation from all present for a life well lived, for the exemplification of the fruits of the Spirit. I first witnessed this beautiful phenomenon with my great-grandpa Farner. I remember visiting him at their retirement home in Melba with my father Frank and my grandma Engle. He was declining rapidly, and we wanted to see him as a family. I didn't really have to hear many stories to know that great-grandpa Farner was a good man, a kind man, a man of integrity, a man of humility, a sterling example of what it means to be a Christ follower, what it means to love well and to serve others. As I stood there in great-grandpa Farner's room, I could see how much he meant to my grandma Engle. I could see how much he meant to my father, Frank Jr., how he shaped them and inspired them in such positive ways. I could see it in the body language, the smiles, and the twinkle in the eyes. I witnessed this beautiful phenomenon once more this past few years, seeing firsthand how my father, Frank Jr., took care of my grandparents at Friendsview Retirement Community, and especially in those last few moments when we knew Grandma was approaching her next chapter. I could see how much she meant to my dad in the way he took care of her. In the smiles, in the eyes, the hidden spaces where nothing was said and yet everything was said. The treasure passed on from my great-grandpa Farner, a legacy of character and faith, of unfailing humility and charity, of integrity, of always putting others before oneself. My grandma Engle was an outstanding exemplar of all those noble qualities. I am so grateful for my wonderful Grandma Engle, and while I already miss her, I'm happy that she is at peace, that after all those years of serving, she has been told, "Well done, good and faithful servant," and now she can rest. I am grateful for the legacy that she has passed down to me, and I am humbled to carry it onward.
Besides being selfless with the need to serve others, Grandma had many talents. She was an excellent cook. Everything she made turned out good. She could sew, she could can goods, she loved antiques. She was an extremely hard worker. She watered her big, beautiful yard by hand. She poured her whole life into Grandpa and the ranch, and she never complained. She always thought that everybody else was working too hard and she wondered how everybody did it, but I think maybe the reality is that she outworked us all. She was always busy, but never too busy for her family and her friends. She was a teacher. She taught us girls a lot of preschool skills as we were little at her house, and she taught Sunday school to us kids at church. She made it a point to do all she could do to make people feel loved and comfortable.
I'm so thankful that I had so many years to spend with Grandma, especially my childhood memories where I grew up right down the road from her, and going over to Grandma's house after school was always the highlight of my day. She would always have a pan of brownies ready for us with powdered sugar on top, and Grandpa always knew when the bus came that means he could get one too, and I would see him come in the door and Grandma would be yelling at him saying it was for the grandkids, and it's just a daily routine that I still miss to this day. Maybe I shouldn't admit this next memory, but it's one of my favorites of me and Grandma getting to spend some quality time together. One morning, it was a school morning and I wasn't feeling too good, and so I got to go over to Grandma's house that day, and she told me, you know, if you're feeling better, I'll take you back to school. And I did feel better towards the end of the day, but I didn't want to leave Grandma's house, and she quickly caught on that I was better but didn't want to go back to school, and she said, well, would playing outside make you feel a little bit better? And I was like, definitely. We got to spend the whole day outside just looking at all of her flowers and all of her hard yard work, and it was a really great memory that I have of her.
My Grandma Frances was my best friend. She put others and their needs before hers without a second thought. She would always ask me every time I saw or spoke to her what she could be praying for me for. Without her and her love, I would not be where I am today. My grandpa and her were my role models, and they gave me their guidance and wisdom, and I am beyond thankful to have so many great memories with them and to be able to share a few of those today.
Here's a story of just how selfless Grandma was and how used she was to taking care of Grandpa. One time Mom was driving Grandpa's truck and Grandma was in the passenger seat, and Mom would reach for the window controls and Grandma would lean over and push those for her, and Mom would reach for the rear view mirror and Grandma would reach up there and adjust that for her. And Mom had mentioned something about not wanting to get in a wreck because Grandpa had taken the headrest off of the driver's seat, probably so he could wear his hat, I don't know, but Grandma gets this look on her face like, oh dear, and she gets unbuckled, leans over, and puts her hands up behind Mom's head as some kind of supplementary headrest. But she did it so genuinely and so sincerely. She was just trying to help, and everything Grandma did was just an effort to help in any way she can.
When we were inside, I loved hearing her play and sing to the piano. She was such an amazing piano player, and I really wish I picked that up from her, but she would let me play on the end of the bench when I was a little kid, and I think she had earplugs in or something because she could sing beautifully and play all the right keys while I was up there jamming on the piano on who knows what notes. She was always really fun to play with.
As a kid, when I would spend the nights at Grandma's house, we would set up little schedules, so to speak. It started off in the morning with her sending my grandpa to Dan's, telling him to get donuts for the kids with very strict instructions not to eat one. We would then spend the rest of our mornings watering flowers and taking care of things around the ranch. I would then spend my afternoons searching for arrowheads and other treasures on the cliff until I heard her ring the dinner bell, knowing that it was time to get home. We would spend our nights watching old Don Knotts movies until she fell asleep right beside me. Just in case I needed something, she would always be there.
Grandma was always hilarious and witty. Even when her mind got kind of fuzzy and forgetful, she was always able to respond with something quick and funny, and she just loved jokes and loved having a good time. She was brave. She would squish quarter-sized spiders with her bare hands, which was kind of terrifying. She always had her mug of iced tea in the summer, and She sang us happy birthday every year faithfully on our birthdays, and a few years ago I missed her birthday call, but I ended up with the most perfect voicemail of her singing me happy birthday, and I'm so glad I have that now. Grandma loved Don Knotts. We had a lot of fun watching Ghost of Mr. Chicken, Andy Griffith, anything with him in it. Grandma loved those old shows and the music. I was actually watching White Christmas the other night, and everything about that movie reminds me of Grandma, especially the song Sisters. She used to sing that to us a lot growing up, and maybe it was because us three girls were sisters, but I think it was mainly because she loved her sisters, and she would light up at the thought of them, and whenever they were together there was a lot of laughs.
What I'll never forget is sleepovers at Grandma's house. And we would always somehow watch the same movie, The Ghost of Mr. Chicken, with Don Knotts, and she would just crack up that we wanted to watch that every single sleepover, but we would always watch it and stay up late and laugh. And in the morning my grandpa would make us pancakes, usually at 4 a.m., so it was a bittersweet. And we'd always love to have sleepovers at Grandma's house.
Growing up, she continuously supported me in everything that I did. Once they finally figured out how to work their phone, she would call me every day after school asking how my day went. I would tell her every time that Mr. Elknap would try to give me detention just simply because she was my grandma. And she would always get a big kick out of that, telling me the stories that he would lock her in the janitor's closet or some other prank that he was trying to pull on her.
Tim and Aaron coming out for visits was always such a huge highlight, and I know Grandma loved having all of the family together. A lot of really great memories came from those visits, and she was really proud of her family, and she was really good about letting us know that regularly. She was so thankful, always thanking the Lord for her family and for her friends and for everything around her, really. She really was inspirational and could engage in your life in a way that made you feel important, and I just feel really fortunate that I was able to spend as much time with her as I did, and that I was able to have such a strong relationship with her. Every moment spent with her really was just such a huge blessing.
The one quality of Grandma that I can say everyone agrees with is that she was always making sure that everyone was okay before she was okay herself. She would just, if she was here today, she would just go around and make sure everyone was having a good time and everyone was comfortable and the air's okay. And she would just be looking out for everyone here. One of my favorite memories was sitting in the back seat when my mom was driving my grandma and grandpa's truck, and my grandma had to make sure that everything was okay for my grandma or my mom to drive. And she was just over there adjusting the vents and adjusting her visor and all the mirrors while my mom is trying to get through traffic on this narrow road. My grandma had to make sure that everything was just okay in the driver's seat. It's just so sweet.
My grandma was truly an amazing woman, and I am so blessed to have had her in my life. Her and my grandpa taught me the importance of family and selflessness and how to strive to become a good prayer warrior. Like many of you, I'm going to miss her. But from the bottom of my heart, I am so happy that she's in a better place and that she's home. Love you, Grandma.
When I was a kid, I'd always ask my mom which one of her boys was her favorite son. And, you know, she never really did want to say, but I'd keep pushing her. And finally one time she told me that her favorite son was actually me. And we didn't really talk about it much, but I think my brother kind of knew it.
Mom told me one time that I was her favorite son. I think it was obvious to my brother, but we didn't talk about it much.
Mom loved jokes and pranks and funny stories, and she loved to laugh, and she had a beautiful laugh. I loved to hear my mom laugh. It just did my heart good. A funny story that happened to my mom was years ago. She used to play the piano up there at church, and one Sunday she got done playing and she went down the left-hand side of the church and across the back and up the right-hand side there where our family sat. she sat down, but it was next to the wrong guy. My dad was sitting a couple rows back, and she didn't notice it, and she snuggled in pretty tight there, and this went on for a minute or two, and I can tell you the people sitting behind, including my dad and even the preacher, found this to be very interesting. And the guy was a family friend. He kind of played along, and those of you who know her know that when she realized what was going on, her response was immediate and loud. And we finally got everybody all sorted out and sitting in the right spot, and the preacher could continue. But that was a good laugh for this family for years after that.
I'm here in the Friendsview Chapel, which is very close to where Mom lived during her last year. She loved this room as well. I'm thinking about how much, how central God was to Mom. She loved him deeply, and it came out so often in music. And I'm so glad she was a part of this community where there's so much music that goes on, both in worship and a lot of concerts and a lot of sing-alongs and such. She loved music here. She enjoyed it at the church. She was often so involved as a leader of the children's choir and ladies ensemble. But I was going to mention that she also loved it personally. It was kind of her way to pray. I can remember growing up, we had this piano in the living room, and she would often, in the afternoons when she had a little bit of free time, she'd sit down and just play. And she'd play often hymns, songs that she enjoyed, some fun songs, but often prayers. There were songs that were basically prayers. And I realize now that one song she sang so often truly was a prayer. And certainly the way she lived her life, her prayer for her life. And that's the song, Make Me a Blessing. It goes like this: out in the highways and byways of life, many are weary and sad. Carry the sunshine where darkness is rife, making the sorrowing glad. Make me a blessing, make me a blessing. Out of my life may Jesus shine. Make me a blessing, O Savior, I pray. Make me a blessing to someone today. That was her prayer. And I think about how she lived that out over the years. She also did it so much through serving other people. I can remember, you got to pray for someone. You've got to send them a card or make a dish, especially when someone passed away in the community. I can so remember her just stopping and saying, "Oh, I'm so sad for them. We've got to make something and drop it by." And a day or two later, she would have something for me to drop by. She'd hand it to me and say, "Would you let them know how much we care?" She did that a lot. She loved the ranch, but it was a place of a lot of work and strain. I can remember, in fact, she would say, like Rick had mentioned earlier, that she was a worrier. She would be the first to admit that she was a worrier. She tried to really commit concerns to prayer. I can remember, especially in high school and college, Mom and Dad would get up in the mornings and they'd have prayer together. And I'd hear Mom praying. I remember Dad praying, but Mom's prayer would be along this line: Lord, we just give this problem to you, whatever it was. Please guide and direct. Please undertake. They'd pray for their needs there at the ranch. Then they'd spend a lot of time praying for other people that they were really concerned and burdened about. But Mom also loved the ranch. It was a lot of work, but she loved it. She loved the antiques. She loved the flowers. She loved those big barbecues that they used to host. She'd work for weeks to get ready for them. And she loved every minute of them. And she'd just ride on those for weeks afterwards, being so glad how they turned out and how much fun people seemed to have. We also had a lot of fun. There were Sprout Springs where we'd like to go swimming. But we also loved to tease. John and I loved to tease her, and especially if we could have a mouse or a dead snake. Those really produced quite a reaction from our mother. We also loved her cooking, and I remember her saying once that she never knew what leftovers were. John and I, we ate her out of the house. And again, she would, I mean, at least in the summer, she'd cook a big noon meal for our family and for ranch hands. And then in the middle of the afternoon, she would often bake some cookies. I'm sure I'm embellishing this some, but boy, she would make these oatmeal cookies. And we'd stop in about 3 or 3:30 between irrigating, and she'd be taking those out of the oven, and we'd be eating those just as fast as they came out of the pan. It was rare to have cookies in the cookie jar, at least when we were growing up, because we just ate them while they were out there cooling. In 2011, they moved to Friendsview, and I shared this at Dad's service, but I really want to highlight that a part of that was because Patsy, my first wife, died. And I remember them saying, we want to come out. We want to come out and be with you and the boys. We want to be a support to you. And so they did. They came out and got a nice apartment here, and we had so much fun. We would hop in the van and go to the coast. Mom especially loved the iris gardens and the dahlia gardens, the tulip gardens, or they raise a lot of flowers out here. And so off in the van we'd go. And we had just a terrific time. They'd come over a lot. We'd have Sunday dinner, and they were just such a blessing and a support to my boys and to me, and they thoroughly enjoyed Janelle when we got together. They were worried I was going to move to Spokane. They were very glad that Janelle chose to move here to be here in Newburgh, so as Dad said, they weren't left high and dry. I want to just highlight that I've worked in senior living now for nearly 20 years, and when it comes to dementia, which is something Mom had lightly, but it became more pronounced over time. You never know quite how that's going to go. For Mom, it was one where her kindness and her sweetness and her joy just blossomed all the more. She couldn't remember what happened yesterday. She wasn't sure what was going on for tomorrow, but she was present today. She loved the caregivers. She loved her friends. She was nearly up till the last day. She would look at me after I'd come down from work. Frank, how are you doing? How are you getting along? I care for you, and I hope you're doing okay. Always reaching out. And today, after this big reception here at Friendsview, I had more caregivers come up and say, she always asked about us and always wanted to know about how we and our families were getting along.
Mom spent an awful lot of time in prayer. I remember that. And it wasn't just the amount of time, it was the way she prayed that had an impact on me. It was, her voice would tremble, and often her eyes would fill up with tears, and she prayed in a way that acknowledged God for who He is. And I tend to talk to God like He's an old buddy, but Mom didn't do it that way, and she understood that it was a great privilege to be able to talk to God and have Him hear. And He did. I know that for a fact, time and time again. We tend to think about life and death as if they're equal, but they're not. Life is eternal. We have life here on earth, and God promises eternal life, and death is just an event that happens in life. And she was right there with my brother and I when we took our very first breath, and we were right there with her when she took her very last one. And the life between that was a good one. And we were there when she made that transition into eternal life, and everything was done well and everything was in order.
I realized in the last days and the last hours of her life, the song "Make Me a Blessing" was a prayer that was answered. Her life truly was a blessing, and through her influence to those who have loved her so deeply, that blessing can continue. And I think that's really something for our family to keep in mind, that her desire to be a blessing, to allow Jesus to shine in her life, really is a challenge and a privilege for all of us to continue. I love you, Mom.